Today showed a stark and startling contrast between the left and the right in American politics. It's the kind of contrast that the Beltway media doesn't always like to admit to, but today it was on display, making everyone very uncomfortable. The Beltway is, of course, very excited these days because some of the left and some of the right are taking the same position on something. Everybody freak out! The important thing, though, is that, boy howdy, are the left and the right doing this same thing in totally different ways.
Democrats this morning are not the only ones turning their back on President Obama's tax cut deal. He's also coming under fire from some on the right as well.
So he upset Republicans for the first 2 years in office, which is to be expected. Now he's upset, and he also upset the left.
It really is a case of strange bedfellows, because on the one hand, you got Move On and progressives objecting, and then look at this. Mark Meckler of the Tea Party Patriots hates the deal.
The left and the right, people on the left and the right coming to the same position. Ah! It is true that there are both Democrats and Republicans, both liberals and conservatives, speaking out against the tax cut deal the president struck with Republican congressional leaders this week. Leading the charge against the tax deal for the left today, you had very visibly, very publicly, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He took to the Senate floor today for 8.5 hours for not quite a filibuster, but a superhuman display of endurance and strength of conviction against the tax deal.
You can call what I'm doing today whatever you want. You can call it a filibuster. You can call it a very long speech. Millions of Americans remain unemployed and have lost their homes, their life savings, and their ability to send their kids to college.
Senator Sanders' work so important on the floor today, taking the floor for a longer period than anybody I've seen since I've been in the Senate, in a filibuster kind of setting where he is, he is raising these questions.
We have a job to do, and if it means staying here through Christmas Eve, through New Year's, that is our job. How much more do they want? The highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. Is this America?
And you wonder why people are angry? You wonder why this Tea Party movement is festering? You wonder why people want to... people are so angry that call. I understand that anger. I'm so angry myself, I don't know what to do.
Losing 600,000 private sector jobs in 8 years is not good. That's very, very bad. That's an economic policy that has failed. We don't need to look at that movie again. We saw it. It stunk. It was a bad movie. As this chart shows, only a tiny fraction of estates from deaths in 2009 owed any estate tax. The Walton family alone would receive an estimated $32.7 billion tax break if the estate tax was completely repealed. One family, $32.7 billion. This is patently insane. It is totally absurd to be giving tax breaks to people who don't need them. U.S. Chamber of Commerce President and CEO Thomas Taylor urged American companies to send jobs overseas. Now, that's really patriotic. That's standing up for the United States of America. We have got to start protecting the middle class of this country. I think we can do better in job creation than in business tax cuts. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor. The Senate stands adjourned.
8.5 hours. That's what the junior senator from Vermont did today. His argument against the president's tax cut deal with Republicans, the argument from the left, central theme you heard there, is that tax cuts for the rich don't do anything good for the economy. They benefit only the people who directly receive them, who are already very rich, and it's a hugely expensive thing to do. It's unaffordable and it is ineffective. And as you saw, that argument from Senator Sanders today came complete with all sorts of evidence, charts and graphs and numbers to support it. Now let's hear from Senator Sanders' strange bedfellows on the right. Let's hear why the conservatives are against this tax cut deal. Batting for the right today, Republican Senator and Tea Party hero, Senator Jim DeMint.
Republicans have something we know is good for the country, such as extending these tax rates. But Democrats are not going to allow us to pass it unless we do more deficit spending on some program that they think is desperately needed. We call that a compromise. They say it's the best deal we can get. But Sean, this is bad fiscal policy because it increases the debt. I'd like to get the deal done now, but it should, in my mind, not increase the deficit. And we should at least have a vote on making these rates permanent.
I don't want to increase the deficit. We should have a vote on making these rates permanent. Just for anybody keeping track, right? Extending the Bush tax cuts for the richest 2% of Americans just for 10 years would add $700 billion to the debt. Jim DeMint is against adding to the debt, right? So Jim DeMint also wants to extend those rich people tax cuts, not just for 10 years, but forever. His argument against the tax cut deal the president made with his party's leaders is essentially, your idea is bad because it adds to the deficit. My idea is better. It adds way more to the deficit. But Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota had a much more carefully crafted argument against the tax cut deal today. According to Ms. Bachmann, this package of tax cuts increases taxes.
Republicans are concerned because it does increase taxes in certain segments, and it also adds to the deficit, and that's not good.
Increases taxes?
Yes, it does. On the death tax, the death tax will go up under this measure.
But
significantly.
But still, there's an exemption for the first 5 million. So.
Well, it's in flux right now as to what it's going to be.
But just to be clear, the president's plan, as he outlined it, is that something you could sign on to?
No, it isn't, because it increases the deficit too much, increases spending too much, and...
But part of the reason why it increases the deficit is because you're maintaining those marginal tax rates through all income levels.
That's right, but remember the definition...
And that's about $450 billion of the projected $900 billion.
And remember, it's a deficit to government, but it's not a deficit to people who get to keep their money. So it's how you frame it. I don't think letting people keep their own money should be considered a deficit.
So to recap, on the left, you have Senator Bernie Sanders and his marathon speech with charts and graphs and numbers explaining that doing a huge expensive thing targeted specifically to the richest people in the country is huge and expensive, and as economists agree, it is not very good for the economy. It is not economically stimulative. The country does not benefit economically. Only the rich people who are getting that benefit. So adding that money to the deficit for the whole country does not make economic sense. That's his argument. On the right, you have Jim DeMint arguing that because he wants the deficit to go down, he proposes making the deficit go up. And you have Michelle Bachmann arguing that for the stuff she wants to add to the deficit, she would prefer you didn't really think of that as a deficit anymore.
Remember, it's a deficit to government, but it's not a deficit to people.
The myth that the left and the right are mirror images of each other, that they're essentially the same, is very attractive to the Beltway media. It's very attractive to sort of anybody skimming over politics. It has never been true, and it has always made me crazy. I would today like to offer my sincere gratitude to Senator DeMint and Congresswoman Bachmann for helping, I think, all of us to dispel that myth, at least for today. Yes, some on the left and some on the right hate this tax deal. That does not mean that the left and the right are either equally crazy, as you will hear all Sunday morning long this weekend, I promise you. Nor does it mean, though, that they are equally genius. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois. She is Chief Deputy Whip. She's a member of President Obama's National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. Congresswoman Schakowsky, thank you so much for braving the cold for us tonight.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Is there a substantive difference between the different objections to this tax cut plan? People are talking about the excitement of these politics here because maybe the left and right can come together in their problems with this. Is there any substantive agreement here?
Absolutely worlds apart. We are hearing from the Republicans that who they care about is a tiny sliver of Americans, the wealthiest Americans in our country, who are already controlling most of the wealth in the country versus the middle class and the poor. But, you know, there's not really a contradiction. When Jim DeMint talks about raising that he's concerned about deficits, now that what they want to do is jump in and say, aha, Now that we have increased the deficits, it's time to cut the spending. And you know what that means? That means cutting the programs, cutting the things that are actually going to help the middle class. That's their goal. Raise the deficit so they can come back and cut spending that's going to really help middle class people.
The argument about the deficit, though, is I think you are right to say that, listen, this is setting a trap to raise the deficit so that they can use that essentially as a bludgeon against things like Social Security and Medicare and other things that they've always wanted to get rid of. But the arguments about the deficit, the thing that is still most salient about them to me is that they are nonsense. This idea that if you cut taxes, that magically doesn't increase the deficit, that revenue has nothing to do with whether or not we have a deficit, and that they refuse to consider the deficit impact of their own proposals. Do you have hope that we'll ever get past just the arithmetic nonsense of those arguments?
Well, we don't need to. What we need to do is for the House Democrats to come up with a proposal that the Republicans are going to be able to buy because they have to. Because the American people are simply not going to tolerate the notion that we're going to just give away the estate tax. Think of this. If someone leaves an estate of $1 billion, under their proposal, they would gain $100 million over what the Democrats are proposing for the estate tax. Imagine Paris Hilton will be able to get an extra $100 million under their plan. It's obscene. It's absolutely an offense to us and to most Americans. And that's why I think that the right wing is making a big mistake. I think there's going to be buyer's remorse because I actually think the Tea Partiers out there, most of them, feel that there is something fundamentally unfair, that the rich, that Wall Street, that the banks and the bailouts, that they're getting away with something, and middle-class people are left to worry about whether they're going to keep their jobs or their homes. And so I think they're making a big mistake by only focusing on the wealthiest Americans.
How much room is there for negotiation right now? I mean, could we see a final plan that has a different arrangement about estate taxes, that has in which those tax cuts for the richest Americans are revisited? How much room for movement is there right now?
Actually, the president himself said today that that the Democrats are going to come up with their own proposal. The Democratic caucus in the House is determined to continue to fight to make sure that we do middle-class tax cuts, that we do a payroll tax holiday, that we give unemployment benefits to the millions of Americans. Our plan affects hundreds of millions of people in our country. There's just a few. Now, how far are we going to get? It's unclear, but I think that we can get a better deal, that we are ready to offer our plan, yes, to compromise, because we know that by January 1st, we don't want to see ordinary people's taxes go up. But I think that we can, in fact, do better. Maybe it's going to be around the estate tax, which is it's ridiculous, and most people see it that way.
Is there real anger between House Democrats, particularly progressive Democrats, and the White House on this? The president has said that he thinks that some of the dissatisfaction with this plan is that people didn't understand it. The White House clearly has been doing everything they can to try to explain and sell more about what's in this plan that they think will appeal to a Democratic audience. How would you describe the relationship right now between House Democrats and the White House? How strained is it, and where do you think it goes?
Well, I think what we see in the leadership of our caucus and definitely in the rank and file is that we want to exert the prerogatives of the U.S. House of Representatives, that it's not just a negotiation between the White House and the other parties, that we have a lot to say about it. We are still in control, I remind everybody, until the end of the year. We're in the majority, and that we are determined to continue to negotiate, that we don't think it's soup yet, and that we're going to introduce our own bill, not necessarily go along with the Senate Democrats either.
Democratic Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, braving a very cold night to be with us tonight. Thank you very much, ma'am. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rachel.